Welcome to Current Affairs. My name is Nathan Robinson. I am the editor-in-chief of Current Affairs magazine. My guest today is Edward Niedermeyer. He is the former editor-in-chief of the Truth About Cars blog. He has been a contributor to Bloomberg View, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and other outlets. His book on Tesla, Ludicrous, the unvarnished story of Tesla Motors, has been called the best take on the company to date by Forbes. It is a remarkable piece of work. There is probably no greater expert on the career of Elon Musk and of the development of Tesla. Edward Niedermeyer is an expert on the auto industry and with a specialty in electric and autonomous cars. You is also, one more thing to plug. You're the host of the Autonocast podcast, which is about the development of autonomous cars. Edward Niedermeyer, nice to talk to you.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I've really been looking forward to it for a while. I've cited your work before because your book is truly fascinating, and this is quite timely having you on because I literally just looked at the front page of the New York Times this morning, and the headline "Pushing for Self-Driving Tesla, Musk Downplayed Tech Limits" is straight on the front page, and this is something that you will get to the issue of autonomous driving and its development and the safety issues around there. But here's where I want to start. I think that Tesla and Elon Musk are quite fascinating. I'm not, as people who've read my work on Musk might probably know, I'm not a huge fan of Elon Musk, although such fans do exist, as you certainly have found out personally. But I want to start with, you have now spent a considerable portion of your life and many, many hours researching this company, this person, this industry. What is it, before we get to, you've developed a reputation as a skeptic of many of the claims put out by Tesla Motors and Elon Musk. And before we get to the kind of debunking aspect, I want to start by why Tesla in particular is fascinating and interesting, why the story of the development of this company in particular so drew you and felt like it was worth spending all this time researching and writing about.
Yeah, it's a funny question to think about because I certainly would love to be able to sit here and say, I saw how fascinating this story would become, and my journalistic instincts, led me to stake out the territory and all that. I really, kind of backed into it a little bit by accident. I had been fascinated. So what originally drew me in was actually Tesla announcing a battery swap station. I'd covered originally got into covering cars by accident. I covered the auto bailout, the collapse of GM and Chrysler and all that. And I'd sort of seen that, new technologies were coming into the space and electric vehicles. There was a lot of excitement in 2008 when I was first starting. And battery swap seemed to me, there was a company called Project Better Place, which is an Israeli company doing a battery swap based business. And it seemed to solve like some of the key issues with electric cars, namely cost of the battery itself. They would just basically lease you the battery instead of buying it. You'd buy the EV without the battery and you'd lease it. And then recharge time. It would be an instant recharge. And
so this is where they take one battery out and they pop another one in so you can just keep going, like gassing up your car.
Yeah, exactly. And so they piloted it in Israel and Denmark. Anyway, that company fell apart, and I got really I was like, it was a learning moment that, just having a good idea is not enough, right? And then Tesla started talking about battery swap. And it was very strange because Better Place's business model was built around swap and it made sense for them. With Tesla, it didn't really, because if you own a car and you own the battery and you've taken care of that battery, do you want it swapped out with some battery whose provenance you're not familiar with? Likely not. And so I became really intrigued by it. And I couldn't find anybody describing actually using this station. They unveiled it. There was all this fanfare. Musk said it was all automated, but it was all happening behind a curtain. And this was 2015. So this was a long time, a lot of water under the bridge now in Tesla world since then. And long story short, I on a whim on Memorial Day weekend went down to the swap station, which is in by a cow, stockyard in the middle of California Central Valley. And what I found there was that it was a busy holiday weekend. Tesla had not opened it. It had not invited, as it claimed, the people who are using its vehicles to drive between LA and San Francisco. It said it was targeting them with invites to use the station. There were long lines of people at the superchargers. People were saying, I was interviewing them, they were saying, we would happily pay hundreds of dollars to just swap our battery and go now. Kids crying in the back seat. What Tesla did do, instead of making that station open as it had told the public it was, and by the way, it had told the California Air Resources Board, which was subsidizing it quite heavily, that instead it shipped in some extra superchargers and hooked them up to diesel generators. And I got to watch, instead of seeing this cutting edge future battery swap technology, I saw Tesla, literally the long tailpipe problem, as it's called, become very, very short as these diesel generators puffed out emissions and recharged these Teslas. Then when I went to Tesla, told them what I found, the way they handled it all was extremely jarring to me. And I realized how cynical really this company could be. And I just had this instinct that, like, that kind of cynicism is never an isolated thing. There's never just one cockroach like this. When you find one cockroach like this, there will be more. And that just really led me to start digging into kind of every aspect of what Tesla's done. And the crazy irony of it is that it's been the perfect story through which to understand these really massive evolutions that are going on in the auto industry.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many directions we could go. I think when you say their response kind of startled you, well, as I was just looking up your bio for the purpose of introducing you, I found that you have actually been mentioned in a Tesla press release before. I feel like the Tesla publicity people, it's fair to say, do not care for you or your work. But what's striking is if you read the statement that they put out, which was about a separate issue, which was them sort of whether
using non-disclosures,
trying to get their customers to sign non-disclosure agreements so they wouldn't tell the government about the problems with their cars. Yeah. But the strange thing about this press release is that it's almost in the language. It's not in like professional language. It says like, we don't know if Mr. Niedermeyer's motivation is to set a world record for axe grinding or whether he has something financial to gain by negatively affecting Tesla's stock price. And then they quote tweets by Elon Musk. And one of the things that the themes that sort of runs through your book that is very, very strange, this kind of paradox of Tesla, is that on the one hand, it appears to be a very innovative and effective car company producing these cutting edge products that dazzle everyone. And on the other hand, as you say, there is a kind of P.T. Barnum quality to it, where like if you look behind the curtain, everything's falling apart and it's not a professional operation at all. And it's not that it's a total fraud, but that there are fraudulent elements to it. I mean, they're real cars and the cars are really impressive. They go very, very fast. But also a bunch of stuff is fake. What's going on?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you've touched on the heart of what makes the story so fascinating, and particularly to anyone who is interested in, in investigative journalism and things like that. And the core issue here, and this is what I saw, in 2015 when I looked into this battery swap thing, was this massive gulf between the public perception, which, as you say, is purely rooted in this, seeing this company as innovative, as a tech company entering the auto industry. There's this sort of inevitability of tech disruption of the automakers, which tapped into this. And so there's this whole narrative that largely lives online, actually, and has this whole apparatus built around continuing to craft and adapt this narrative every day on social media and online. And then you have the reality of what's actually happening. And these two things are very, very, very far apart. And of course, as someone who wanted to do investigative journalism, the instinct is, well, I'll tell people the truth, right? I'll go and I'll dig and I'll uncover the truth, which, by the way, is very difficult because people are very afraid of puncturing. People who have worked for the company, who know it from the inside, and who have exposure potentially to Elon Musk specifically, are very afraid to go on the record and talk about this stuff. But I was able to uncover a bunch of stories about a bunch of different aspects of this company, again, under the assumption that when people see the truth, the truth wins out. And what's been fascinating is that it hasn't. And so, part of the challenge of this story is that there's many stories. There's the story of Tesla as an automaker. There's the story of Tesla as a driving automation technology developer. There's stories, there's so many aspects of it, but perhaps the most neglected aspect of the whole story and the most important one is Tesla as an online phenomenon. Because I think it taps into a lot of what we see coming out of the internet in terms of radicalization, in terms of how easy it is to kind of build these self-sustaining movements that really can't even be touched by facts. And I think that's a really, as much as anything to do with the auto industry or the future of this technology or anything like that, that to me strikes me as almost the most troubling and problematic aspect of all of this.
Yeah, I want to get to some of that, but you mentioned there the fear that people have about talking about Tesla. There's an example in your book that's really, I'm not going to recall the facts quite correctly, but there was some critical blogger in Montana who Elon Musk called their employer, and then they took the stuff down. I mean, they really do use underhanded means of trying to suppress criticism. And as I quoted what they said about you, I mean, they're very, very aggressive in going after critics and accusing them of lying about the company and implying that it's libel or slander and that everything's false and that they're hurting Tesla. They're out to get Tesla. I mean, it's an extremely, extremely aggressive approach to trying to shut down criticism.
I think this is one of the key features of Tesla as an online phenomenon is that it never is about engaging with the substance of either critiques or new information brought to light by investigative reporters. They never address the substance of it. Just as you point out in that the 2016 blog post about me, about Montana Skeptic, about countless examples, it's always an attack on the individual. It's always this person either has or may have some kind of financial or other kind of bias or interest or whatever. And that's what explains these facts or this analysis that doesn't fit with the narrative. And the thing is that what underscores that is this desire to believe the narrative, right? It's not that just shooting the messenger is a very viable tactic, and they've proven it. And by the way, Elon Musk was doing it long before he was the character he is today, but he's baked that approach in to the entire culture around this company. And so a big part of this culture is that there are these entrenched interests in oil or the short sellers or this, that all have these entrenched interests in seeing Tesla fail, and that everything negative or critical or that just simply doesn't match the accepted narrative must come from them and must therefore be fabricated. And it's that logic that kind of supports this sort of, or is supported, it's hard to say where the chicken and the egg is, this sort of broader undercurrent, or it's not even an undercurrent, it's a main theme of the culture, which is that the facts don't really actually matter. There's
something Trumpian about what you're describing.
It's personal loyalty to Musk. It's almost like a feudal kind of approach or mindset where it's it's personal loyalty to this one guy. And by the way, I think the other thing that people don't necessarily understand, and this also explains where the fear and why it's so hard to get people on the record, is that this culture that you see among Tesla fans on the outside, this is the culture that Tesla has cultivated internally as well. And it's the same sycophancy. It's the same, everything revolves on, is Elon going to like this? Is he not going to like this? There's been reporting where, employees are literally, looking at the various shades of his then wife's blonde hair to try and determine what kind of mood is Elon going to be in this day. So we can internally, it's this petty dictatorship that of course now is also worth $1 trillion. So it's not really that petty anymore.
Yeah, I mean, there are all these reports about things like, we can't put yellow warning signs because Elon doesn't like yellow, and who's he going to fire today, and all these bizarre. He seems, from your reporting and some of the other reporting, like a kind of like what would happen if you put a middle schooler in charge of a car company. It would be like, I want gull-wing doors, and they're like, that's very difficult, and it's like, no, we're having gull-wing doors. He's like, oh, okay. I think but what's really weird, what's fascinating and weird about the Tesla case is that it's not Theranos in that it's not entirely smoke and mirrors where there is no underlying product. Underneath all of this, like there's a bunch of fraud. There's a bunch of pretty much outright fraud that has occurred, right? I mean, the report of all the stuff about the autopilot, like he's just told like blatant public lies about a lot of stuff. But first, I would love it if you could explain what the kind of genuinely impressive aspects of Tesla are, because building a new auto company, an independent auto company, is really, really difficult, notoriously. Building electric cars that people actually want to buy because they're sexy and better than other cars, right, is not an easy task. Like, Tesla has accomplished things in the auto industry that are quite remarkable. And one of the strange things is how they've managed to accomplish things that are remarkable despite having this being ruled over by a madman and having this internal this totally screwy internal culture as you describe.
So I think these things are not as in opposition as they oftentimes appear to be. Look, let's face it. If Tesla had been purely and rationally judged on, fundamental capitalist standards of dollars and cents, and not just dollars and cents in the here and now, but because there's always the like, well, they're not profitable now, but they will be down the road. Like, if you look at the fundamentals of how the business is run, that's it takes a lot of faith to believe that Tesla is ever going to make a lot of money, that it's ever going to succeed on sort of basic capitalistic standards. And so it's been that other thing. It's been that what is oftentimes seems just kind of like je ne sais quoi, that has carried him through. But really, I think, to your point, it kind of does boil down to, I'm not convinced that Tesla would be here today if it weren't for the fraud. Like, I think that the fraud has been fundamental to the success, and in part because the fraud is not, it's not, you're right. He didn't set out to defraud people. He set out to accomplish something. And I want to answer your question about what they've accomplished, because I do think it's important to give them credit where it's due. But I think it's also important to understand. And by the way, like, this is what's so scary to me about this boom in, new EV startups and the SPACs and, all this other stuff, is that my concern is that if Tesla, if my theory is correct, and Tesla, and by the way, there's a lot of evidence, and this is what the book in a lot of ways was trying to prove, was that they kept getting into trouble and they kept having to do these very shady things to get out of that trouble. Is this huge now sector of startups, like, are they now forced to either choose failure or fraud? Because it will be very difficult. Now, they can avoid a lot of the problems that Tesla got into because of Elon's quixotic nature, right? But
that's a nice. That's the most gentle euphemism you could.
But I think if not, even if you want to get away from the controversy of calling it fraud, the culture that sort of created or enabled those fraud-like behaviors, if you want to be really careful about how you say this, like, that was absolutely, you cannot say that Tesla could have survived without this intense culture that is built around seeing it as something more than just a typical business that you judge on dollars and cents. Now, we can get into that more, but I want to just answer your question really briefly. So the key insight that Tesla had, or the key accomplishment that Tesla has made, is actually not really what people think. I don't think. I think what they've really accomplished was understanding that there was and again, I think they kind of backed into it, which is fine. Like, everyone backs into all kinds of cool things, but it was that the tech sector, the success, the dominance of the information revolution, all the people making all this money in Silicon Valley were a really attractive segment for premium and luxury cars that the auto industry did not have the cultural competency or the insight to identify and pursue. Okay. And Tesla right. And if you go back to the early history, both Elon Musk and then Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning, who were the real founders of Tesla, they were building vehicles for themselves. And so that's what I think the core of Tesla is. It's a car and a car brand now that speaks to technology people who have helped change the world through technology, who see themselves in terms of the technologies they work with, and who want sort of the traditional status symbol vehicle, but they want one that embodies their values or what they see as their values. And I think that's what Tesla's catered to. And that, I think, is really the auto industry's biggest failure. I think saying that Tesla proves that EVs were an idea whose time had come ignores the fact that EVs are a tiny percent of the market still, and that where they are more than a tiny percent of the market, it's been 100% due to government policy. Like that, maybe it wasn't an idea whose time was come in terms of a government policy to drive climate outcomes or whatever else, right? But it wasn't like, and to this day, and again, this also is a myth that underpins this boom in EV startups, that the market is just inexorably shifting to EVs. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that Tesla proves that that's the case. What Tesla proves is that tech people wanted a car that reflects who they are and what they value. And Tesla did that perfectly. Yeah. And that's the core of their success. And they've built on it from there, because also, by the way, a big part of that tech culture and those tech values is the sense of inevitability that we are going to conquer literally not just information technology or communications technology, but through those, the entire world. And Tesla was just Silicon Valley's first step into this world of cars, of mobility, of transportation.
There is this sense in which we live in an economy where the perception of value is in fact value. And I feel this way every time I read about like cryptocurrency. I was trying to write, I wrote an article about cryptocurrency recently, and I made the case that a lot of the arguments for it are wrong or fraudulent, but I couldn't make the case that it was a bad investment, because the point is that as long as people it's one of these things where as long as everyone believes in it, that belief sort of comes true. You believe a thing has value, then it has value. Tesla's value, well, I don't know if the present valuation makes any sense on any kind of economic theory, but there is a sense in which as you say, a huge part of it is driving brand perception and belief in this thing, creating what is supposed to be this like self-fulfilling prophecy. Tesla does well because people think it's going to do well, and behind the scenes they are doing everything possible to hush up anything that could destroy that perception, because the perception is so integral to the value.
That's exactly right. No, and that's what that disconnect is all about, right? And what I didn't see at the time, to me, approaching it in 2015, 2016, 2017, stumbling into this, trying to understand it, and of course watching it evolve and grow bigger and bigger. Again, where I got this story wrong was the assumption that, eventually things regress to the mean, and the mean is in some way tied to truth and reality. And I think what we've seen, and that may still be true, right? And yeah. we don't know what the future holds. We don't know how sustainable this very strange economic mode that we're in right now is. But you're right. I mean, throughout history, people have defined what's valuable and what's not. Why is gold valuable, but others aren't? Other metals aren't as valuable. It's a very subjective thing. And you're right. And I think with Tesla, where the rubber hits the road is that it's not just that people have decided that Tesla is valuable. It's also that when Tesla stumbles, which they do again and again, that people are always willing to sink more money into it. And a company like that can't fail. If a company's narrative is strong enough that when the fundamentals break down, people are just say, oh, let's throw a couple more billion into it. It must be worth it. Then the incentives are then now 100% aligned with the perception, the narrative, and not with the reality. And by the way, we've seen this become, with meme stocks, become this really dominant mode for our whole economy, or at least our capital markets. And to me, it's fascinating. I think Tesla is the original meme stock. I think it goes back to 2013. Did
you define the term meme stock for listeners who don't know?
Meme stock is a very difficult term but it's basically what we're talking to. It's things that are valuable because people are see them to be valuable, decide they're valuable. So we're talking about stocks like GameStop or like AMC, or these things that people latch onto, decide, hey, if we can just agree that this is valuable, it will become valuable. We will create value out of essentially nothing. Tesla was really the first case for that. They had a stronger narrative than the AMCs and the GameStops. But I think what's really important to understand here is that this didn't come out of nowhere. What Tesla's innovation in this area that's now given birth to this whole new mode of the economy or capital markets, again, they're not the same, is it came out of venture capital. And I think that's where the story starts to connect back to Theranos and things like that, is that, there's this strain in the venture capital community where, the venture capitalists will admit, especially after a couple of drinks in private, that they kind of want to be lied to. They kind of want a founder who is willing to push up to the point. And by the way, one of the dirty secrets of venture capital is that the VCs don't actually understand everything they're investing in. Of course, they couldn't possibly if you look at the range of things that individuals are investing in. And so they do often bet on the jockey and not the horse. They do often bet on intangibles. And I think what's happened here is that Elon Musk was very successful at that. He went through a number of very, very tough financing rounds when Tesla was private, where he had to go to these private investors, and almost any other company would have failed. And through a number of tactics and wranglings and this and that, he managed to succeed there. But then when Tesla was public company, the stock was flat for a couple of years. It wasn't until 2013 when he kind of pulled a bunch of stuff together and went on this media campaign. And that was when the stock started to go crazy. And that was when this meme stop thing happened. Really happened. And again, I think what was happening there was Elon realized, I can take the tactics that have worked with these private investors and take it to the public markets. The important distinction here, the reason that hadn't happened before, is because accredited investors and mom and pop everyday investors and pension funds and things like that are not the same, right? And there are levels of protections for non-accredited investors that are not afforded to accredited investors because they're more sophisticated. Accredited investors are more sophisticated. They understand the risks. They understand the technology. And, you kind of see this in a lot of things, but like one of the classic examples is with full self-driving. Musk didn't go to accredited investors, venture capitalists who kind of understand the technology, some of them, and ask them for money to take on this very risky endeavor to develop full self-driving. He went to the public. And that to me is a major difference because the public, especially in 2016 when they announced this, was not in any shape to be able to tell what was real and what wasn't. And so by taking that tactic with the sophisticated accredited counterparty and taking it into the public, it's like not even fair. It's no wonder that he's won.
And I think it's worth adding that the public especially is incapable of adjudicating the truth or falsity of Musk's claims when there is a perverse incentive in the tech press, where every time Elon Musk says, like, in 2 years I'm going to Mars, or I'm going to tunnel under the city of Miami, or whatever big promise it is, it's printed. Elon Musk promises, very little follow up on this, but you understand that the stories get clicks. He sort of builds up this brand. There's this visionary inventor. There's like a children's book that's about like Elon Musk and the future, right? There's like he's cameoed on The Simpsons, and they're not satirizing him. They're like, Elon Musk, the great inventor, the Edison of our time.
His company perfected electric cars and then gave away the patents.
And so when someone has built successfully a reputation as the Thomas Edison of our time, or like, I'm going to rescue the kids in the cave with my mini submarine, it doesn't matter that he doesn't do it. I mean, people associate in their heads him with innovation, and it builds trust.
So really quickly on the Simpsons thing, I actually go back and watch the Musk Who Fell to Earth, that episode. I think it's fascinating because it's like Monty Burns sort of represents capitalism, and he ends up taking over the power plant from Monty Burns because people are tired of the same old capitalists, and he's this alien kind of weirdo who fell to Earth, and he has all these brilliant inventions, but ultimately the power plant goes out of business, everyone gets laid off, and they hate him, and he goes back up. So it's actually they were satirizing him in a very prescient, very subtle way. I actually it's probably the best piece of pop culture about Elon Musk is that Simpsons episode, which is surprising because it's like a later one, and later Simpsons are inconsistent.
For a man who likes electric cars, he sure burns a lot of rocket fuel.
But I think you're absolutely right that it's Musk is an aesthetic. Musk is no longer a man. He's a brand. He's an aesthetic, and he is so inexorably linked, as you say, to this idea of not just disruption, but like the inevitability of tech doing everything better than everyone else. And that's why one of the things that I really tried to do in the book was look at what are the differences between tech culture and sort of industrial manufacturing culture. And really, like, what do we want in our cars? Because clearly tech culture brings things to the table. Classic example, this is the big screen, right? Everyone's like, oh, Tesla, the screen of Tesla is so much bigger than any other car. Their technology must just be better. Yeah. Well, no, the difference is that established automakers will not put a screen in the car unless it's, quote, automotive grade, which means it passes this wide variety of tests, for robustness. And Tesla simply just didn't hold itself to that standard. They just put a non-automotive grade screen in their car, and it's still the biggest screen you can get in a car. And people don't understand.
And you can actually, there's a news report on this that I saw you quoting. You can actually play video games on the screen while you're driving.
Yeah. And this is where we get into, the safety stuff and the automated driving stuff, which I think is really important. And again, it's one of those stories that on its own is just massive and complex. And you have to understand not only the technology, but also a lot of behavioral psychology and things like that. And part of the problem, and this is very Trumpian, is that Musk creates these problems which were relatively easy for him to create, right? Just flip a switch and let people play video games in their car or design Autopilot a certain way or whatever. And explaining the problematic nature of them is complicated and hard. And there are like hundreds of these problems. And so like there's this asymmetry going on, which again, for me, very much reflects what happened with Trump, where he could put out complex problems faster than the rest of us could try to understand them, let alone try to solve them. And I think this is it's like a cultural hack that we're very, very, very vulnerable to.
No, it's true. And I realized as I was preparing to interview you that I'd never get through like all of the different incidents that you report on over the years. And then I was looking at the Wikipedia article on criticism of Tesla, and Tesla problems has dozens of entries. We go through all of them and how the company responded. First, I did want to ask though, because it came to mind as you were speaking, here's what I want to know. Here's something I've wanted to ask you for a while. How much does Elon Musk actually know about building cars? Because when I read him on Twitter, I see a very, very deeply stupid man. I see someone who says things that I just can't. When he was talking about COVID, he was, all of his COVID tweets were horrible. I mean, he says things that are just, just some of the dumbest things I've ever read. And then I try to reconcile this with the fact that he runs a successful car company that puts out cars that people do say are really, really cool cars. They go really fast. He must know some things. He must have some. He's gone to space. There's some. Is there genius wrapped in stupidity? Is it what is it? How do you understand this man?
Yeah. So, he's obviously a very complex guy. Certainly in the book, I faced a choice really early on. Like, do I want this to be about Elon Musk or do I want it to be about Tesla? And I really tried to make the effort to make it about Tesla, but you can't separate the two. You just can't. You can't separate them institutionally, in public perception, any aspect. So the answer to that question, I would say specifically about the manufacturing of cars, I would say his record is extremely poor. One of the big moments for me was in 2016 when he announced the Model 3, got all those reservations. He started talking about, revolutionizing manufacturing, which he still talks about. Literally nothing he's ever said about it makes any sense. He never consulted even internally with his own people about any of it. They all found out through his public statements, just like the rest of us, that Musk wants to build this alien dreadnought manufacturing system that's going to be super automated, not even going to require people. And by the way, that's a really interesting thread in him. He's very anti-people if you scratch his stuff a lot, which is
that's what he said about public transit. He said, like, who wants to be around like other people?
There's numerous of examples of this. And for someone who wants to save humanity, he doesn't seem to like people all that much. But to answer your question, so what he did well, and again, it gets back to what was Tesla's core contribution here. He was very good at shaping the design of cars and the design priorities of cars to appeal to people who are either in the tech sector or who identify with technology, high tech, which is now a lot of people, right? And so the innovations that have happened, the positive contributions, things that make Tesla popular are almost all in the design of the vehicles and sort of some of the features around it, the decision to do superchargers and certain things like that. Everything he does is optimized for first impressions. And that's why there's all the focus on the design, is because that's the first impression. You look at the car, you get in the car, you accelerate for the first time, you activate autopilot for the first time. All of these things are like, whoa, like mind-blowing. This is nothing you've seen in a car before. The tech sector is revolutionizing what it means to be a car, blah, 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 blah. The problems start stacking up basically as soon as those first impressions end. And both with the ownership experience of the car, but also as a company, I mean, their service operations are a mess. And their parts availability is a mess. Insurance is like, they've struggled with insurance again and again. And they can't bring those costs down, in part because they're designed for, they optimize for, aluminum body panels, which are great in a lot of ways. They lighten the vehicle. They're very strong, things like that. But then when you dent one a little bit, all of a sudden you're looking at thousands of dollars of body work, right? It's much more expensive to repair. And I think that, like, if people come away with one single lesson from this whole thing, because I think this is at the core, which then once you build on this, you start to understand Tesla more fully in all of its aspects. The core one is that engineering is all about trade-offs. And what Musk has successfully done is convince people that there aren't trade-offs. He just picks the better choice. And that there's no downside to that. And the reality is there always is. And what I think explains a lot of his success is that he has just optimized. We're a very short-term impression, gratification kind of culture. And he optimizes for that. I think in the long run, enough of us relate to cars as an appliance. And by the way, like, American psychology in particular has always been torn back and forth between, are cars just a mobility appliance that we want sort of ruled by the most rational, needs that they're serving, or is a car something more? And Musk has really swung the pendulum towards cars are something much more than just an appliance. And I think inevitably, the pendulum always swings back.
Yeah, this was a revelation for me reading your book, was that for so long they had not really focused on building the cars well, to the point where they had all of these avoidable mechanical problems because just solid fundamentals of engineering were a secondary concern to creating the really, really cool car.
Check this out. We click the T button here, scroll down. You can draw on your Tesla. Are you going to use this? Probably not. But the fact that Tesla put the energy into making this, I think it's pretty cool.
I'm sorry to interrupt myself, but I need to take a moment to ask you to consider subscribing to the print edition of Current Affairs magazine. If you enjoy this video, you'll love our print edition. It's full of games, puzzles, comics, miscellaneous, and sophisticated analysis on issues of worldly importance. You might also like the Current Affairs podcast, which features interviews with notable people who are experts on all manner of things and are also delightful conversationalists. Go to currentaffairs.org/magazine to find out more about the magazine. Go to currentaffairs.org/subscribe to subscribe to the magazine. Go to patreon.com/currentaffairs for the Current Affairs podcast. And if you'd like to support our work, which you should because we are not for profit, please consider going to currentaffairs.org/donate so that we can use your money to make more wonderful things, more wonderful magazines, more wonderful podcasts, and more wonderful videos. Speaking of which, back to the video. To what extent is Tesla's success dependent on the government? You mention at various points Tesla essentially being bailed out or subsidized. How much of a role has that played in the company's ability to survive?
So the almost $500 million loan that the Obama administration gave to them absolutely saved them. And then you have the subsidies, right? And I think in a lot of cases, the subsidies for Teslas have been sort of rewarding people for choices they were going to already make anyway. But I think we know that a lot of people, the Tesla stretch is famous. People have stretched financially to afford a Tesla, and those subsidies have been an important part of it. Also, by the way, the most overlooked is like the battery swap thing, the California ZEV credits thing has been huge. And what people don't understand there is that the competitors have been subsidizing Tesla. Those subsidies that are going to Tesla, basically Tesla is getting paid for them not to develop EVs. And so like the idea that Tesla's presence somehow forces everyone else to make EVs, it's really been the opposite. They've been paying them. And then of course, Tesla has been maximizing those credits by doing things like the completely fraudulent battery swap thing. So yes, I mean, a lot of things have kept Tesla alive. Government is one of them. And certainly it's been an important factor that Musk's now sort of saying, oh, there shouldn't be subsidies for anything is totally hypocritical, and just kind of more the sign of kind of like who he is as a person.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I bring this up is because I think it is an important case study in debunking the idea of a purely free market that functions in accordance with, if a product is the right product for the time and people want it, the lemonade stand view of capitalism, in which the state is excluded, in which the role of hype and fraud is excluded. We've brought up tangentially at various points now this Autopilot situation, which you've mentioned, which you've talked about as quote complete fraud. I think this is one of the things that I think is, I mean, and I'm sure you agree, that an incredibly important story, because it really, when we're talking about this, we're not just talking about hyping a luxury product that as something that is going to be a future mass consumer good, but it's not really going to be. We're actually talking about human lives that have been lost because of a lie or the massaging of the truth that is that is designed to convince people that something exists that doesn't really exist. So maybe you could lay out what Tesla and Musk have done and why it has been so problematic.
Yeah. So I think, if you look at Tesla as a whole, there's a lot of good and a lot of bad, or there's definitely some good and some bad, right? But I think if you look at just their experience with driving automation, it's been all bad. And I think it's happened because that cycle that I was trying to document in the book of getting this funding treadmill and, sort of running out, having to raise, create new promises to fund the old promises and getting into this kind of Ponzi-esque dynamic. Full self-driving was where that really kind of took things to another level. And again, to me, that's where it crossed into just, you cannot debate that this is fraud territory. But there are kind of two main stories. And this is, again, part of the problem is like we have to untangle what's actually going on here. Because there's the Autopilot situation and then there's the full self-driving situation. The Autopilot situation, yeah, let's start with that, because I think it's in some ways the most important, because there are literally thousands of these cars on the road right now, right, that are potentially endangering our safety every time we're on the road. So Autopilot started when Tesla was almost bankrupt in 2013. He approached Larry and Sergey at Google and said, buy my company. And they agreed at a handshake deal to buy the company at like a 25% premium. Musk would stay in charge. They get 5 years worth of financing. It was a very generous deal. Musk pulled off a bunch of other stuff, which we don't have time to get into. That's when the meme stock thing, early 2013, started taking off. Didn't need Google anymore and ditched them. And then immediately after that was the first times he started talking about driving automation. And at first he said, maybe we'll work with Google. And then almost immediately after he said, we won't. Well, so what had happened was Google had, right before those negotiations over the course of 2012, and those negotiations happened at the end of 2012, beginning of 2013, but throughout 2012, Google had tested a product called Autopilot. Only it was capital A, capital P, instead of just capital A like Tesla does. They called it Autopilot. It was essentially the same as Autopilot. It's called a level 2 driving automation system, which means it's highly automated. It automates the longitudinal and latitudinal control of the car, but it's not autonomous. You need a human person sitting there to make sure it doesn't screw up. And what they found in their internal testing is that people inevitably get distracted. Inevitably, people do their makeup, eat food, they're on their phone, people even have laptops, like crazy, crazy stuff. And that's unsafe. And so Google made a decision. It said, we're not going to deploy this kind of technology. We're going to continue to develop it until it's truly level 4, which means that it's fully autonomous. You don't need to even have human controls in it. Musk clearly saw that they were deciding not to move forward with this, clearly realized the technology was further than he thought it was, and clearly realized that in a trend-driven, ecosystem like Silicon Valley, that EVs were going to become the old thing and AVs were going to become the new thing, and he had to get an iron in the fire ASAP. And so that's where Autopilot came from. And so basically what it comes down to, it wasn't some innovation. He simply wouldn't listen to the lawyers that Google listened to, right? And with Google, I don't think it was just the lawyers that were saying we face legal liability if something goes wrong here. It was also them feeling like they had this long-term investment in the technology, and that if people were buying this sort of halfway house version of it, and then it would crash, and then the human would be blamed for the crash, it would ultimately destroy trust in the technology. And fundamentally, autonomous drive technology requires trust. You are putting and by the way, when you first get into a fully driverless AV, this becomes so clear. You are putting your life in the hands of technology. There's no human there to save you. And when you do that, you start thinking, why do I trust this company so much? I say this from experience, right? So what happened was Tesla had a number of their employees said, we have to have good driver monitoring on this, right? We have to make sure that we have like a camera or something really good in the car to make sure that when the system is active, the person is not just distracted. Musk personally shot that down out of cost concerns, the Wall Street Journal's reported.
And one of the most disturbing things that I've seen is that Elon Musk kind of makes public statements that imply that the need for drivers to continue to pay attention is like a legal thing we have to say, but actually the technology is really good. So really you could depend on it, but yes, keep your eye on the wheel or whatever. And then Tesla fans, I mean, a couple of the people who've died have been like huge, like Tesla fans, like testing this technology, kind of egged on by Elon Musk's implication that this technology is in fact really, 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 really good and reliable.
Absolutely. And what we've seen is when people like Walter Huang and Josh Brown have died. So like Josh Brown, for example, when they've died, the Tesla fans blame them. They say, and Tesla itself basically says, these people, chose to be distracted. They chose to operate the system in a place we told them like isn't necessarily safe for it. And therefore, it's all completely on them. And what the NTSB has said is like, no, like, and because we know from literally decades of behavioral psychology, particularly those that look at safety critical systems and partial automation, that if you put someone in what's called a vigilance task, where they're just monitoring this automation and they just have to be there to jump in and take over when something goes wrong, which over time gets more and more rare. Like, this is not a question of good drivers do okay at this and bad drivers don't. It's not driving. It's a very fundamentally different task than driving. It's one that we as humans are actually less well evolved to do than unassisted driving. And it's inevitable. There's no moral or skill factor in this. It is inevitable that every human who is put in that position will eventually, given enough time, become inattentive. Then given enough time, the system will find something it can't deal with. If they're inattentive, that's when it's so basically people are gambling with these sort of numbers, right? They're playing roulette in a way.
Yeah, I think a good way to think about it is if someone gave you a task and the task was watch this light, and if the light turns red, press the button within a second. Okay, do that for an hour, now 2 hours, now 3 hours, now 20 hours. At a certain point, you're going to get bored. I mean, it's not like when you just think about the kind of task that you are asking people to do, when you're asking them to monitor something that does pretty much everything, we can see why people die.
Yeah, and it's not just hitting a button either. It's gaining instantly situational awareness of what's going on around you. That's very complex. And this is the thing. And this gets into another issue. And then also, recovering properly, which requires car handling and instincts and all kinds of things like that. We're just starting to understand, and AAA Foundation for Auto Safety did a great study on this, and numbers of others are looking at it, which is that how you communicate about these systems affects how people use them. So if you tell, so there was a great study, the AAA auto safety one, they gave people two groups of people the same system. They told one of them, this is called Autonodrive, and it's basically self-driving. They told the other group, this is like drive assist or something like that, and it's just there to help you out. The people who drove the Autonodrive, they were the same system. The Autonodrive people use it less safely. And so we know this is called autonowashing. And this is a term that's gradually starting to get a little bit more awareness that it's not just that Tesla created a system that inevitably leads to this kind of distraction and dangerous situations. It's they're actively inducing people into that distraction and that inattention. And to me, it's just morally, like, it's just so indefensible.
Right.
Because
people are dead, right? People trusted this company and now they're dead.
Yes. And on a much
they
less,
listened.
Yeah, absolutely.
They took Elon Musk seriously, and as a result, they lose their lives.
Yes, and then get blamed for it by all the fans, and not just the fans, but the whole Tesla media ecosystem.
Right.
And then full self-driving takes us to another level. Because,
that
full
is
self-driving.
the other one. What's the deal with that? So this is where, again, this is where the Tesla crosses into just unambiguous fraud, because there was, first of all, it's level 5 autonomy, which you have to understand nobody in the space is pursuing. Level 5 means fully autonomous, no need for human input ever, but operating anywhere in the United States, basically anywhere a human could drive, this system needs to be able to drive. And this is the core of its appeal, is Musk says, we're developing this generalized system and everyone else is sort of, tied to these, local operating domains with mapping and all this other stuff, more expensive vehicles. And again, we do not have time to get into all of the ways in which this is an absolute fantasy, and literally everybody who's serious in the AV sector, like, it's just people are amazed that this even has as much credibility as it does. And again, I think it comes down to it's that he's identified not a plausible, fraud or vision that he's selling, but an appealing one. Like people believe it because they want to believe it. They want to believe that they can buy a car. Again, it gets back to that frisson of futurism, but like without having to change any kind of behavior, because you're just going to go out and buy another car. It's going to belong to you like any other car, but unlike other cars, it's going to just drive itself anywhere and everywhere. And that's absurd. I mean, the short version is that, like, as a camera only system, so then they get into the camera only stuff. As a camera only system, you're relying on what is technically, people call it AI, people call it machine learning. Probabilistic inference is fundamentally what it is. And when you think about that term, probabilistic inference, and you think about something that could kill you at any second. I don't want to rely on probabilistic inference.
Does this sound like a good combination?
There is a 98% chance that there is not a truck coming head on at you.
And I don't want to scaremonger, because, and I think when you talk to people, and look, I've had the opportunity to talk to lots of people in what I would consider the legitimate AV space, and they're really conscious of this, that yes, we need probabilistic inference to make self-driving cars, but then we have to architect it in a system that and do things like deploy it in a limited domain, which we can have a lot more certainty about, so that when we're making those inferences, we can get to that 99.9999%. Musk is not making even the vaguest concession to plausibility in this, and yet it's working. And yet it's also the most popular. Like if you ask an average person on the street to name an autonomous vehicle leader, they're going to name Tesla. And I'm sort of out of ideas out of how to deal with that, because if people think that you can just kind of bluff your way through autonomous driving technology, how do you stop a person like that? And so I feel like we're reaching this point now with all of these different things where the impunity has become a problem that in itself is bigger than all of the rest of the problems, because and the evidence is clear, the pattern is clear, that unless that impunity is checked, he will create more totally unnecessarily. Again, like the video games. Who was complaining that I can't play video games while I was driving? Like, there's no upside to it, and it's only now about destroying all of the remaining norms around sort of safety and how we try to ensure some level of safety. Not very well, by the way. 40,000 people almost die every year on our public roads. And yet he's pulling back the most basic things that keep that from being worse, by the way, at a time when the numbers are getting worse. And so I think it's like,
you just lie about the numbers. I mean, one of the things you showed is that he just lies about the safety statistics.
Yeah. No. And again, I wish I had more answers about how we as a society can sort of draw a line around this stuff and say, listen, like the cars are cool and stuff. We'll keep buying the cars, but like we've got to really like ring fence some of this stuff, because ultimately it's also going to force a backlash. And I think that, to me, and I think this is also important to understand, like I think there's been a lot of hype and a lot of, misleading, not just from Tesla around automated vehicles, but I do think this technology has a ton of future promise. And not just, I don't think it's maybe we could talk about this more on some other time, but like, I don't think it's just about preserving the car monopoly on mobility in this country. I think there's all kinds of really interesting possibilities this technology opens up. But fundamentally, when someone is out there basically eroding public trust in it, if that keeps going, we'll never have the ability to really realize a lot of these potential benefits of this technology. And so it's not just like Elon Musk is bad. He's putting this entire like century really of pretty profound and fascinating and frankly potentially disruptive change at risk by taking risks that really don't benefit even him that much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is one of the depressing features of our time, is that we live in an age that should be really exciting in terms of what we are capable of doing, and yet we have so many fraudsters and grifters dominating our economy. And as you say, it's a symptom of a wider problem. There are so many parallels to Trump, especially with this kind of impunity thing, where when you're called out on something you do, just deny that you did it and just double down and just just attack all of your critics and keep going, and eventually you'll just rise and rise and rise. And if you keep doing it enough, you might become, as Elon Musk is, I think now, the richest or second richest man in the world, on paper, for whatever that actually translates into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just say, I mean, to me, like, so I studied political science in school. I got into this car thing and then into this mobility technology thing. As I explained, I pretty much backed into it. But it's really shown me that like this world, and by this world, I mean like technology more broadly, but even mobility as well. I think because we have all of this potential now with new technology to really change a lot of fundamental things. And the piece that's missing oftentimes is people who have a more sort of social sciences, non-technical people with more social sciences and kind of a broader understanding of society and like the, social systems that we live within and power and things like that, to engage with this stuff. And for folks who aren't necessarily just technical people to sort of really think about like, how can I engage with this technology? How can we create new way, like leverage this technology's potential to not just make cars that drive themselves like Elon's doing, despite the fact that that vision is so popular, but to really think about like, how can this technology actually really build that public trust and build solutions that do benefit kind of everyone. And I'd love to see more of that kind of engagement, because I think there's a ton of opportunity for it.
Well, I would love to discuss that more with you. There are so many paths we could have wandered down. Your book is really fantastically well researched and fascinating. You're one of the as a few people who has really been willing to take on Tesla publicly. As you say, there's a conspiracy of silence around a lot of it. So people should listen to your podcast, pick up your book. Is there anything else we should plug?
You can follow me on Twitter at Tweetermeyer, pretty much.
Tweetermeyer, yes. Well, Edward Niedermeyer, thank you so much for this fascinating conversation.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
How much would you charge to work for me? I don't care about the money. The whole monetary system is just a series of interconnected heterogeneous databases. Could you repeat that first part?